Thanks everyone for joining our Startup Grind fireside chat here with Frederic Van Haren. Excited to have all of you as part of our community here tonight. And just for a little bit of background on Startup Grind itself, it's basically the largest community of entrepreneurs. Started out in Silicon Valley 10 years ago, and now there's 500 different chapters around the world, all hosting these events with bringing in different speakers, and then we come together for a global conference in February and some other regional conferences throughout the year. And there's a new startup program at companies can apply to as well, that either you'll get some information on that if you haven't already, or it'll be part of our newsletter that now that you registered, you'll all be a part of. We partner with other sponsors and partners that all serve the startup community, including two of our sponsors are Brex, which is the first corporate credit card for startups, and they now have a new cash management system as well. Basically, as a replacement for your bank, you can use their tech-enabled platform to manage all of your startup expenses. And then ShipQuid, which is a local sales automation tool for startup companies. And then we partner with other development groups like Zyk and 9 Series, as well as media companies like Kraus, and consulting businesses like Prepare for VC that work with startups, and other tools that enable us to connect with our audience and provide event services. Several co-working spaces that we'll host our events at. And if there's anything you guys need, there's a chance that, a good chance that Startup Grind, or even our local chapter in general, has a connection there. So definitely reach out to us and let us know. And also just want to make a note, like it'll be a fireside chat format with Frederic and I, but also we want to make this interactive. So feel free to introduce yourselves through the chat function in Zoom. If you want to share a little bit about what you guys are working on, the startups you're involved in, or like share your LinkedIn to connect with people. Basically anything you're looking for to get out of the networking side, please do that in the chat, and we can open up a little bit more near the end of the chat as well. Any questions you have throughout, you can ask through the chat box, and then and then towards the end we can open it up into more of a Q&A session from there. So with that, I'd like to give Frederic a chance to introduce themselves, and then we'll dive into some questions.
Great. Thanks, Jason. Thanks for having me, and welcome to everybody. So we're going to talk a little bit about AI today. So my background is I didn't start in AI. I started really in HPC, in high performance computing. That's really a while ago. And my main focus in the early days was speech recognition. So I was hired by a speech recognition company that wanted to be a major player in the market, and was looking for people that could help them with HPC at first, right? HPC meaning it's scaling, developing complex algorithms. How do you grow them? How do you scale them? Really, data was really not an argument, or not really a point in those days. That only came back in 2005 when I was called into the senior vice president of engineering. And I was told that we were going to do something novel, and it was all about data, which on those days was not really called AI. It was just called, let's do something with data. And so in 2005, we had 5 desktops where you wouldn't even call that large scale. But a little bit of a fast forward. I did that for 12 years, and in the end, we had 150 racks of equipment. So you can kind of look at what we did there. The company was Nuance Communications, which you might know from Dragon, the guys behind Siri. A lot of the team members went to Amazon Alexa. So you can kind of see that nuance. And the group I led there for 12 years was kind of all driven about AI and how do you introduce AI. And AI was in those days a very generic term. Nowadays, people talk about machine learning and deep learning, and they're really specific terms. In those days, it really wasn't the case. And then about 4 years ago, a lot of people were telling me that my expertise was very valuable and they would like to kind of hire me more as a consultant perspective. So I kind of switched gears. I left Nuance and I became an HPC and an AI consultant. So I really help the vendors in the market kind of transition or transform their portfolio of hardware to an AI portfolio. And I also help enterprises kind of understand what's available to them. So that's kind of a little bit of an overview of what I've been doing so far.
Perfect. And then, as you mentioned, like it's sort of, or AI's transitioned and the definitions transitioned a little bit along the way too. Yeah, how have you seen it change? And what do you currently consider, where AI is today?
Right. So when I started, AI was really the generic term we were using, and that's also the definition today. So if you purely look at the definitions, AI is the big pool, and then machine learning is like a subgroup of it. And machine learning in the early days really was referring to technology like Hadoop, like Spark, anything that was CPU driven. And then you have deep learning, which is kind of a subset of machine learning, and that's typically heavy duty calculations and neural networking, and that's typically where you use GPUs. Although that's the theory, in reality, you will see that machine learning and deep learning, the CPUs and the GPUs are kind of flowing into each other. But that's really kind of more from a definition perspective. I mean, I always get asked what is really the difference between machine learning and deep learning, and my answer to that typically is very non-technical. And so the way I explain it is that let's assume that the AI problem to be solved is sorting fruit, right? And machine learning would be the case where you're asking a human to sort fruit. And so a human has a concept of an apple, right? So the features of an apple, it could be round, it's green, could be yellow, could be red, and so on. And then you kind of apply a label to it, right? So all these requirements and features you call apple. Now, imagine that deep learning is where you would ask an alien to sort fruit. So the alien has no concept of what is an apple. But if you give the alien enough fruit, enough apples, enough bananas, enough pears, eventually the alien will be able to extract the features, and then you apply a label to it. And that is really kind of a simplified definition of it, but it's much easier than me trying to explain, why you would use a neural network with GPUs and CUDA and so on.
Great. Yeah, and then so what do you see as is the goal of AI to be basically, do you see it as being as good as humans or better than humans at certain tasks? Like what's the current state of where it is and the goal of, AI in general?
Well, obviously the theoretical wish list is that it's as good as humans. Reality is it's not, right? But it's much better than anything else we have in the past. I mean, the way you can look at AI is it looks at the past in the form of data and is trying to predict what you did in the past for the future, right? And it can do that at such a large scale. And so from that perspective, if you think about autonomous cars, this is a great example to your question, right? So can a car drive better than a human? Probably not. But the AI you use for autonomous driving is that if each car, which is an AI, can communicate with the other cars, you end up with a much better solution than individual humans, right? So humans can be distracted, can be frustrated, name it up, a lack of experience. But if you use AI, where the AI by itself is not necessarily a better driver than you, however, while it can communicate with the other cars, it's a much safer solution than having a bunch of humans drive by themselves.
Right. Yeah. So what are some of the like the hottest areas you've seen, or some of the other examples you've seen AI applied to in the current space right now?
Yeah, so definitely with COVID-19, I have to say healthcare, right? So what healthcare was a market where AI really wasn't pushing that hard. But with COVID-19, it's clear that a lot of the AI investment is being pushed in healthcare, right? So, and it's not only trying to find a vaccine, but it's also how can you detect um, a virus, right? How do you come up with some alternative solutions? How can you prevent it, and so on? And so after healthcare and pharmaceuticals, I would say it's still the autonomous business, the automotive business, where autonomous is the self-driving car, while what's also a lot of demand for now is AI in the car, right? It's helping the drivers and the passengers kind of pass time while they're driving in the car.
Right.
Those are clearly the two more publicly known areas. No doubt, there's always government. There's a lot of government AI going on, and then there is the specific vertical, which is what um, what people call is the outliers, right? It's looking for it's applying it AI for outliers. So, for example, look at machinery. When you deploy machinery, the manufacturer will have recommendations for you have to change oil at that point. You have to change this at that point. You can use AI to find anomalies, and the anomalies basically mean is the machine suddenly start to behave differently than it behaved before. Then you have a way to interject and fix the problem, right? So as opposed to say, I'm going to change the oil every 10,000 hours, now you get a lot more feedback from AI. And so AI is still not a mature product. In certain verticals, you will see there is a lot of maturity, but in most cases, it's still touch and feel. And what you will also see is that AI is not something that starts from scratch. You will see areas like oil and gas, right? So oil and gas typically has been a very large high performance computing environment. And so what is happening is they see the benefit of analyzing data. So what they will start doing is to replace some of their HPC solutions with data-based solutions in AI, if you wish. So they're not
Right.
completely switching over, but you can see that from a maturity perspective, there is a gradual slide from an HPC to AI, because in the end, data will tell you a lot more. And certainly if you think about with the amount of data you can collect, I mean, in the past, AI was a challenge because you couldn't collect a lot of data, right? I mean, you might remember, 20, 30 years ago, a 20 megabyte hard drive was like a brick and it would cost a few $1,000s. Now for the same price, you can get something in the terabyte. So the ability to collect data, and the more data you have, the more useful AI you can generate, it's really key.
Yeah, and I want to tap into or one of the audience questions from Ali and sort of tie it into another question I was going to ask as well. Basically, or his question is, does the progression of AI parallel the progression of the internet? And also sort of like, where do you see where this has gone? So in the past, we used to talk a lot about um, data analytics, and now everything's AI. So what do you see the progression of this space?
Right. Right. So there are different stages, right? So, and I think the key word is analytics. AI is analytics on steroids, right? So everybody has used some spreadsheets to figure out, you know, some basic stuff, and the amount of data we used in order to do that is not a lot. I think what AI does for you, it provides a level of scalability that you could not achieve before. So let's take an example, right? So if you would recognize, let's say, faces in pictures, right? So in the past, you could really not do that at a large scale because you didn't have enough pictures to do so. While nowadays, there are a lot of databases, there are a lot of people that collect data to help you do the same thing, but instead of having only 10, 15, 20 pictures, now you have access to a few million. So I do see AI as analytics on steroids, and you a lot of the standard applications you're using today will use AI more and more. Examples are the thermostat, right? So you have thermostats now with smart thermostats. And what are those smart thermostats? They're actually just using your own data, historical data. So they look at the temperatures outside, they look at what your temperature settings are inside, and they're kind of using that in a practical solution. Waze is another example, right? So Waze is a great application. It is all AI. So what Waze really does is when you type in a destination, Waze is going to look at its historical data to figure out what a normal time to destination is, and then in real time it's going to figure out, you know, are there other people that took this route before you, and if yes, you know, did they see like did they see traffic, did they see construction, you know, all these pieces are put together. But when you use Waze, you have actually no idea that it's AI. And I think you will see that more and more. I mean, people always talk jokingly about, you know, talking coffee machine. It is really something that is not difficult to do anymore. So I do think that data is becoming a key piece. And I'm pretty sure, you know, people will ask about privacy and so on, right? Because eventually if you start collecting so much data, privacy definitely is an issue. You know, how far do you go to collect that data, and what do you do with data? So if you look at companies like Facebook, who are a company that live basically from your data, right?
Yeah.
Those companies, if you ask yourself, you know, how far can they go with using that data? But I do believe that AI and analytics, it's just going to be part of our life. You know, and in certain cases, it might even make a decision for you. Amazon
Yeah.
is
No,
yeah.
that's a good, I mean, I think that's an interesting conversation there. Like, you know, especially, or part of your background is with Nuance, and I mean, I'm familiar with them because of or I know there's several different products, but the team behind Siri. So like, and obviously there's a lot of data that's being collected from everyone. Every time somebody asks a question, how did your team go about like figuring out what data you should collect, what you should aggregate, and how to prevent like security concerns around that?
Right. So the advantage of solutions like Siri is that you can identify quite accurately who is making the request, right? And the reason why I'm saying that is because you're using your cell phone. Your cell phone has a number, and most likely you're the only user of your cell phone. So the from an architectural standpoint, what we decided to do is instead of having a centralized environment where all the data is piled on and analyzed, you actually start with a basic AI model, which is very generic and is independent of your usage. And then we apply something what we call adaptation. So what we do is every time you use the system, we will take your data and we will adapt the existing basic generic AI model to the point where we can improve the accuracy for you. So the sharing, if you wish, of data between you and somebody else using the system is very, very minimal. And the definition of minimal is if we recognize something that is different um, in your speech than somebody else that we believe could be useful, it's anonymized and sent back to build the more generic model. So in those cases, it is easy to kind of share, to isolate and define the privacy guidelines and to control it. It's more difficult if you have a system where any like an internet website where anybody can really go, and the IP address could be really dynamic, right? You could call from a cell phone, from an iPad, or from a computer, and so on. So privacy is really key. A lot of people pay attention to it, but in the end, you know, it's still a major concern.
Right. Okay. Yeah. So then I guess, I mean, for or the instances you just talked about there, you know, you want all your data personalized. There's other aspects where, you know, you're looking more at the aggregate information. So I guess it just varies by the industry and use case there.
Right, right. And then in order to improve, maybe another way to explain it is also the data we use from you is what we call context, right? So in the end, when you say something like, please make a reservation for 5 at 7 p.m. tomorrow, there's a lot of information missing, right? But if you in the past always made a reservation to the Italian restaurant on the corner, that contextual information will be used to help you out the next time you ask a question where the data is missing, right? So the data is not just being collected just because they want to. The data is being collected to provide you a service that is more human-like, right? Because that's like we said earlier, that is ultimately the goal, is that you can talk to a Siri and that you can do Google searches that are more in a human language as opposed to keyword spotting or trying to manipulate the system, right? Because that's really the biggest concern of people that deploy AI technology, is that it should be as close as possible to humans. So they will add any kind of features and collect any kind of data that will help them provide a more human system.
Right. Yeah, we had a question around the Turing test. Basically, yeah, can you go into a little bit about what that is, and is there, or sort of the question was around Google's assistants, and do you think there's an AI that can pass the test there?
Yeah, so the test was originally generated to figure out when a human or a machine was involved, right? It's really an old test, but it's still being discussed by people. First of all, to make sure that if you pass the test, does that really mean that the machine behaves as a human? You know, I guess there's a public answer and a personal answer. I think my personal answer is that the test, you have to have a test, but I'm not sure if that test particularly is a good one to go and say, you know, it's black or white, right? Just like AI will never tell you it's black or white. AI will say, well, it might be, it's somewhat black, somewhat white, and for a percentage, there's a lot of gray in there. So I do think you need a test. Me personally, I don't use that as a test to identify that. And then you talked about the Google Assistant. So the Google Assistant is heavily focused on context, right? So because the more context you have, the better it is. And the way they process the text and the context is through what they call NLP and NLU. So it's natural language understanding and natural language processing. The Google product is called BERT, B-E-R-T. And so that has come up in the last, I would say 18 months, where Google has spent significant amount of effort in order to improve Google Assistant and also Google Search, right? Not just the voice piece, but also Google Search, with massive improvements around NLP and NLU to make the search queries as human as possible. The way you can, one way to look at it is, you and I have been using Google probably for a long time, so we know how to work the system. But a teenager who just gets a phone and wants to use Google search, they have no idea how to manipulate the system. So they will actually deliver and present full sentences to the Google engine, right? So the Google engine needs to be able to adapt and act more like a human and understanding, you know, that there are words in there that doesn't mean much to the system, like the and a and However, as part of the question, it is critical, and those items need to be pulled in as well as with context.
Yeah, so then when you're building out, building out some of these technologies, I mean, if you look at other examples of tech, like in the past, all the cloud-based systems were developed from scratch. Now we can just plug into AWS or Google
Right.
Cloud and other systems. Is the same thing true in the AI, or where is the AI space right now in
Right.
developing this tech?
Yeah. So it's called transfer learning. And so what the concept of transfer learning is, if you would say, if you would wake up one day and say, I want to build a speech recognition engine, right? So the challenge with that is you don't probably have all the data in order to build a model. You don't have all the resources to build it. And so the concept of transfer learning is that you take somebody's model that was built, and then let's assume it's a neural network, with different stages. So what you do is you kind of cut off the last few stages, and you apply a much smaller neural network to it that you then can use and build a system. So you can use AI today. If you find existing AI models, you can get to the point where you can get results really quickly. So an example in the speech recognition world would be, if you want to do like a wake up word, like Alexa, for example, right? So what you could do is you could take an AI speech model, and then in the end, instead of trying to recognize all the different words and providing these results, you replace it with a piece of software that takes the AI model and just looks for the word Alexa or whatever word you want to use, right? And so transfer learning today is something that allows startups and other companies to build like Lego blocks, pretty much,
Right.
can build on other people's technology and get AI done much faster. And transfer learning can also be used to combine a bunch of AI technologies, right? If you want to do biometrics, eyes, voice, face, and all that stuff, that's where transfer learning also can be very, very efficient. And that's what makes AI so powerful, right? You don't have to start from scratch. There is a way for you to build on what people have built in the past.
And yeah, Michael had a question that tied into that. Like, what are some of these, or you mentioned like the Lego, the building blocks. Yeah, what are some of the tools people are using today?
Well, it depends. So when you talk about AI, there are two components. There is the training phase, which consists of building the language model, and then you have the what they call inference, right, which is just putting the model in production. And so there's an answer for the training phase, and there is an answer for the inference space. If you look at people that want to start with AI, for example, they could go to AWS, and AWS, as well as Azure and GCP, will actually have components built on Kubernetes and others where you can just plug and play without any coding. You can just say, I want the following components, and they allow you to build those systems. I'm trying to remember what it's called on Amazon. It's something maker, stage maker, I believe it's called. Yeah. Anyway, so the point is that the public clouds are making it really easy for you to do all of this, right? And mostly it is on the inference side, taking certain things that already exist. Training is a little bit more challenging, because training is where you have to deal with petabytes of data, most of the time with petabytes of data, and a lot of CPU power. There is no hello world for that, right? The hello world would be, $10,000 worth of CPU resources. While from an inference perspective, it's a lot easier to do an hello world, like, do some basic speech recognition or image recognition.
Right. So where do you, yeah, I guess, over the last few months, with the developments that were going on in this space pre-COVID and now, like how has that changed throughout the current situation?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a good question. Actually, I just finished the blog. I haven't posted it exactly about this on this topic. So if you're interested in the AI market in general, um, COVID-19 didn't really hurt the AI market. So I would say that people that are in the AI business and the AI spending will be the same or higher, but there is a shift in urgency. So a lot of people are focusing now a lot of their spending and budget, and I'm talking about VCs here, right? In VCs and others, to invest in healthcare, pharmaceutical, and biotech companies at the expense of others, right? So there was a press release 2 weeks ago from Uber where Uber was announcing that they were dropping the autonomous effort for cars, not for trucks, but for cars. So you can kind of see that the funding is changing and shifting between verticals, but that the overall AI market actually will do really well. I mean, the
Right.
I want to say, I don't want to say the good thing about COVID, but one of the positive side effects of it is that it kind of forced people that were not heavily investing in AI, like pharmaceuticals and healthcare, to accelerate and to force themselves to not only accelerate AI, but more importantly, to work together, right? So if you think about it, the medical market, everybody was working on individual efforts to build a vaccine for Ebola and you name it, right? It really was driven by economics. What you would see now with COVID-19 and AI in healthcare is people, these organizations that are typical competitors are now sharing data. I mean, data is really critical to accelerate and speed up the time to a vaccine. And I do believe that healthcare, biotech, and pharmaceuticals will see a big boost. But since it's all about data, some of the methodologies and techniques they're using in order to get the vaccine will also benefit the other one. So
Right.
in overall, I would say spending the same or higher, but a shift in investments in local verticals.
Yeah, so just digging into the even or if we focus on the healthcare like aspect, I guess, I mean, part of the benefit is you can go, or yeah, I'll ask, your opinion on this, but you can go through large scale testing of different hypotheses a lot faster than um, was traditionally able. So like, how do you see these systems, yeah, basically allowing you or what are the main benefits in that space that you've seen sort of accelerating the process
Right.
there?
Right. So right now, because we're in the middle of it, we always talk about kind of resolving or fixing COVID-19.
Right.
AI can be very effective in prevention and detection. So an example is there's a company called Blue Dot. It's a company in Toronto, Canada. They used AI with some basic data to figure out that some kind of pneumonia was running around in Wuhan in China, and that's somewhere end of December. So it's not just to find a cure, it's also prevention, right? So a virus is a living thing. A virus, COVID-19, as we only talk about COVID-19 as a single unit, but by now there are multiple strains of COVID-19, and next year there will be a stronger version of COVID-19, and you want to be able to detect it and prevent it. And detect it can only be done by data. The question is, what do you look for? How do you go and find these things? So I think all those different areas, it's the prevention, the detection, and the actual cure. Those are the three areas where I see a lot of demand for now in healthcare.
Um, Good. Yeah, I see. Or yeah, another question here. What are the abilities or human abilities that are difficult for AI to imitate? Um, and what makes it difficult, or at least at the current stage right now?
Yeah, I think accuracy. I think accuracy in general. So you think about AI. AI is a piece of technology that gives you statistical representation of something. So, for example, if you would use AI and on images of people and say, who has blue eyes, right? And so there's false positives, there's false negatives. There's a whole slew of statistical results, and so that is a concern with AI is accuracy. I think most items can be approached with AI as long as there is enough data. I think it's the accuracy, and also the um, what I'm looking for, an English word. It's preset. I'll give you an example. If you would look at, if a town would say, would like to know what are the dishes that people ordered the most, right? And if the marketing company that they hired goes to the local middle school, and instead of asking 500 adults what their favorite dish is, and they would ask 500 middle schoolers, you would not be surprised that chicken nuggets is apparently a very popular dish in your town. And so it's the accuracy of the data, it's the privacy, and that is more of a concern. I don't think there is nothing that is being tapped into as long as there is data. um, and accuracy, I've seen it from close up, that in the early days, you can have a model that looks good to you based on the data you have, but it's really operating badly from an accuracy perspective in a more generic world.
And do you see, are there, or interacting with, I guess from more of a consumer perspective, like whether it's, voice assistants or other
Right.
technologies, is there, I mean, I feel like there's been a large trend towards adoption over the recent years, and people
Yeah.
are getting more comfortable. Do you see any barriers and areas people aren't comfortable with, or?
Right. I think the challenge is translation. So chatbots, there's one thing. It's for you and I to have a conversation with a chatbot in our native language. It's another thing to have a conversation with somebody in a different language, because when you talk about chatbots and assistants, you're not just trying to have a conversation in the same language. You also try to do translation. I mean, that's the holy grail, right? 25 years ago, when I started the speech company, they had one slide, and that slide was a circle, right? So you had text to speech, it's the machine talking to you. Then at the bottom you had speech recognition, and they had like arrows going all the way, right? So you can, and then they had translation on the side, right? So you heard something in English, it would translate into something else. You would record it, spit it out in another language, and then get it out. That is extremely difficult today, because not all languages have compatible words. There are double meanings for words in certain languages. So I think that's going to take a while. But again, if you think about AI, you can only make progress if you have the right data, right? So people are going to start developing products that in the beginning might not be perfect, but the goal of AI is the product doesn't have to be perfect, as long as you have an influx of data and you apply that data back into your algorithm such that it will improve over time.
And yeah, so do you see a lot of that, or is most of that data, proprietary, and like algorithms behind the specific companies that are developing that, or is a lot of it open source, or?
Well, yeah, the major players, it's Google search and Facebook, right? So every time you write a little note in Facebook, that data is being used as, this is how a human interacts or reacts to a following message, right? So that's why Facebook and Google and Apple and all the other ones, right, are providing free services because for them the data is a gold mine, right? And so for larger corporations, collecting data is not a big deal. For smaller corporations, it's clearly a bigger deal. And it also depends where you collect your data, right? So I remember Nuance a few years ago, they signed a deal with Comcast, and so we had a speech recognition engine that actually would listen all the time for the keyword, the wake up word. But there's a problem with that because we don't know when the wake up word is going to come, so we have to listen all the time, right? So which is a concern because you don't want people to listen in into what people are saying in your living room, right? So but I think collecting data is going to become easier because people don't really have issues anymore, although they should from a privacy perspective, but they have less and less issues. Like people are using Waze, people are using Google search, Facebook, at will, Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, name it. All of those apps are free because the revenue for them is the data and processing that data.
Do you think it's already been been applied to every sort of industry already, or are there some areas that haven't been tackled yet that could need to leverage more of the machine learning and AI technology?
Yeah, I wouldn't say all across the market, not all. I think there's still areas where it is not there yet, and I see a lot of AI introduction being pushed by outside events. So, for example, think about Blockbuster, right, and Netflix. Blockbuster didn't want to do AI, but while Netflix was using AI, AI became a competitive advantage for them, right? So I think
Right.
Blockbuster in the end quickly tried to do that, but they never intended to use AI because they were happy with the formula. And I think that's what you're seeing a lot in the industry right now, is that a lot of people are being pushed around. And if your competition and the C executives see the benefit of using AI, you will see many more pushes. It doesn't mean it's easier, right? So I mean, the legal and medical are always being very, very difficult. I mean, imagine a surgeon, right? So if you have an AI model that is 85% of the time accurate, that is great for a chatbot. But if you're a surgeon and you use speech recognition to figure out if they have to amputate the left or the right leg, 85% is pretty crappy
Right.
percentage, right? You're gonna have a
Yeah, I don't
decent
agree.
amount of very unhappy people. Same thing with law, right? Law is another one where there's tremendous amount of documents and law, and as you know, in law in courts, they sometimes refer to older cases as a baseline for the court. So there's a lot of AI to be used there, but it's challenging, right? So it's the data is there, but it's in a format that is not very easy to do. And then what happens if you have a court in Massachusetts versus a court in Atlanta? How do you share that information in such a fashion that it can be used? So in short, I think there's still a lot of markets and opportunities, but it's clearly C executives and competition forcing people to penetrate those new areas for AI.
Okay. Yeah. So in some cases, like the long term is still more of like supplementing humans, or even within, I guess, in the AI or in the development of AI related products, like how involved is the human feedback in that process, like outside of just the pure data collection?
Well, it depends. I mean, data typically is generated by humans, right? So you have an input cycle through humans. In machine learning, there's a lot of input from people, while deep learning concept is where you rely mostly on the machines, and it depends from case to case, right? So for like a chatbot, I'm pretty sure the machine or the human position is very, very slim, while autonomous, the human input into the model is probably much, much higher than there. So I think it depends from case to case. And what you described as AI, act like humans, they refer to it as cognitive AI, where the idea is that it behaves like a human. But not all humans are the same, right? So who do you want to behave like, right? So but it's mostly data with common sense, and it also depends, like I said, with autonomous cars, you want some input from a human to make sure that nothing crazy happens, right?
Right. Yeah, just on the we're using, I guess, using autonomous cars as an example, like um who defines, sort of what the gold standard of that is? It every car automated going the speed limit, or
No, no, it's an association. So it's a group of people, and they define different levels. So if you want to play around in the autonomous car business, they have definitions for what a car, or what the autonomous car should be able to do, right? And so they define those different levels, and 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 so when you want to play in those levels, you have to, first of all, you have to join and make sure you comply with those, so that everybody understands at what level you are. But there are definitely regulations, right? So autonomous cars, anything where life threatening things are happening, like airplanes, cars, um, legal and medicine, there are rules and a lot of paperwork to comply with on what you can do.
um yeah, so then as we look towards, and you've been called the tech forecaster, and yeah, what other areas do you see, like, AI is a hot topic, still, blockchain, AR, other technologies, what do you see coming to the forefront?
Yeah, I think AI is extremely generic, right?
Right.
I, I think it's the chatbots, where you do translation. I think that is a big one. Blockchain is more towards finance, although I see more and more use cases where it can be used to identify and authenticate people. I mean, if you think about it, when you look at your phone, it's relatively easy to break in a phone, right? I'm pretty sure car manufacturers don't want to hear that, but um, phone manufacturers don't want to hear that, but it's relatively easy to get in, right? And even facial recognition is only as accurate to a certain point. So I think technologies like blockchain, authentication, security, privacy, all of those areas are where there's been a lot of investment, as opposed to just to get it done. As far as technology itself, I'm talking to so many different areas. I think for AI, it's more um, the accessibility that is going to make a difference, right? So 5-6 years ago, if you wanted to play in AI, you had to be an expert and preferably have a few PhDs under the roof. Nowadays, you can do some AI at a more um, common level, but in the future, it should be much easier to plug and play with AI and put the things together that you really want, right? So like thermostat in your house, coffee machines, TVs, recording, all of that, you should be able to build and put those pieces together. I don't see a particular technology moving forward. I think we should have to talk to the AI startups, and they probably don't want to talk about what they're working on. right? Because
No, actually, yeah. So I guess we'll do one more question here, and then I can open up. Yeah, if a couple people want to unmute like one at a time and ask some questions or introduce what they're working on. Yeah, we can do that towards the last few minutes of the chat here. But just yeah, right before that, a question from Parna. Um, are what basically who coined the term the tech forecaster, and how did you become that?
yes, so tech forecaster comes from the fact that when I look at a design of an overall architecture, I can pinpoint the bottlenecks in the architecture, which is which is very good to have, but it aggravates everybody else in the team because it feels like you're trying to shoot down all their initiatives and designs. But it is very difficult to follow through end to end, you know, all the data flows, the bottlenecks, the network bandwidth, the amount of CPUs and GPUs. And so at some point, that was one of my strengths, and that's one of the reasons why they actually asked me to lead the AI team, is the ability to foresee things to happen. AI is kind of funny in the sense that when we started with 5 desktops and we ended up with 150 racks, I mean, you can imagine that the scale is so significant that you can only successfully do that if you have some kind of an idea on where the issues will be and where the bottlenecks are and how to fix them. And then, so my team started to call me not the tech forecaster, but really the guy as could, you know, who could find issues. And the other reason why they actually started calling me that was when new systems were deployed and they would ask me to look at those systems, for some reason, everywhere I would look, there would be issues. And so, so at some point, you know, people kind of assumed that I had a gut feeling and an understanding where to look first. But again, all of this is really key in order to build and sustain a large environment. And so the tech forecaster kind of stuck with me.
All right. Yeah, so in the last few minutes here, no, I think we had a great discussion so far, and yeah, definitely want to give a chance to a couple of our audience members. Does anybody, or yeah, if you want to unmute yourself, we can go one at a time. And basically, does anybody want to start? Just share a little bit about the technology you're working on, and maybe a quick question. Frederic can help answer. Let's see. I don't see like a raise hand function. So I guess if anybody wants to just unmute, you can go for it and take the lead here. If not, yeah, while we wait, there was one more question from Norman. So when you use AI, as you say, are you speaking about packaging AI software that has the ability to customize, tweak, and maintain it? And basically, is the core logic of AI a piece of software that is static and stable, or does that terminology change as you go?
I wouldn't say that the terminology changes, but I would say that the tools changes very rapidly. So without a diagram, it's kind of difficult to explain, but let's, you know, I talked about training and inference, right? Training, imagine that training is where you feed all your data, and the output of the training is a model, and that model is what you put in production. And production basically means, let's assume it's speech recognition. So you use a speech recognition model for American English, and then people start using it. Now, every time people say something, that data goes back all the way to training, and then is being pushed through the whole system. So AI is not a static setup, it's a living thing, right? So AI by itself is not very useful if everything is static. Like just like with Waze, right? Waze is very, very dynamic. The reason why Siri works, it's because it learns from what you're saying, right? And it learns it from a recognizing the words as well as adding context. And so it's almost part of the definition of AI that it's a continuous process. And the challenge with AI in general is that, you know, every time you collect data, you have to store it and you have to process it. So it's really, you know, if you collect a lot of data, it's a linear, and worst case is an exponential curve, right? Where you collect so much data that you have to find a way to grow properly. And that's what we used to do in the speech recognition group.
Okay. Yeah, and then so as a lot of our participants are, you know, and members of our chapter are startup founders themselves, some like more technical and some more, you know, business and other areas of expertise. I guess what's one thing you think early stage startups should be focusing on as they, you know, try to project out like what technology or where their business is going to go over the next few years and build out the technology behind it?
Right. So yes, you have to have an understanding how data can help your business, right? So the AI is not going to do that for you. You
Right.
kind of need to understand what the value of the data is, what you want to extract out of it. But I think equally important is AI is trial and error. You know, if you have an ID and you have a concept, you don't need a billion data points in order to get results. You can get away with a few hundred, a few thousand data points. Try something in the public cloud, only use the resources you need, and build from there. It's really trial and error. I see many people kind of being scared to adopt AI because they believe they need a PhD and they need a lot of expensive hardware. It is really something you can do easily, and I would suggest and hope people try things. There's a lot of documentation out there. There's a Coursera and others, you know, for a relatively cheap price. They have a lot of information where you can learn from. NVIDIA has tutorials with live GPU cards if you want to try it for almost no money. It is really, you know, jump in it and try it out. There is no real reason not to try these things.
Great. Yeah, no, I hope I hope everyone jumps in and yeah, I guess so. Oh, thanks, Ben. Yeah, for putting your LinkedIn in the chat. If anybody else wants to connect through there, feel free to do the same. Put my LinkedIn too if you want to connect. Basically, and yeah, I just want to give you a big thank you, Frederic. You know, yeah, you were great on this chat. I know I learned a lot, and I'm sure all of our audience did as well. Thanks to everyone here who came out, and we have our next event, or we've been doing pretty much every 2 to 3 weeks throughout these virtual events here. So on the 17th, so in about 2 weeks, we have a biotech event with Elizabeth O'Day, how innovating for good, how biotech change makers are leading the way. So yeah, that, and we'll be adding some other events to our startupgrind.com/Boston site. And yeah, would love to have everybody else come out to more events. And hopefully we'll be back to in-person ones sometime soon. Sorry, I typed that in wrong. There's no second. Event there. But yeah, again, thanks everyone for coming out here tonight. And yeah, if you guys have any questions or resources you're looking for that we can help out with, feel free to reach out to us. Yeah, our Startup Grind team, and we'll make those introductions and connections.
Great. Thanks, Jason.
Thank you.
Thank you.